everyone, this is Savannah DeLillo, and today I would like to talk to you about the course number 7 entitled And He Shall Purify. This can be found on page 29 of your score, but before we get started, I'd like to play for you an excerpt of the movement so you can get a feel for what we'll be discussing. So again, what we just heard was And He Shall Purify, which can be found in part the first of the Messiah. And He Shall Purify paraphrases Malachi chapter 3, verse 3, which reads, And He will purify the sons of Levi, that they may offer to the Lord an offering of righteousness. And this movement builds upon the ideas that have been introduced in the preceding aria, which include Malachi chapter 3, verses 2 and 3, and Haggai chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. Which speak of God's might in the day of His coming and His refinement of Israel, specifically the Levites. And in context, Israel has just returned from captivity in Babylon. The temple has been rebuilt, and though Israel is in fact performing the sacrifices required by God, they aren't doing so in a pure and holy way. And for this, God will judge Israel, and Malachi compares God's judgment to that of a refiner's fire. An interesting biblical tie that I found can be found in the New Testament in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 17, where it speaks of Christ being a merciful and faithful high priest. So just as Malachi prophesies about God's refinement of the Levites, the author of Hebrews reveals that Jesus Christ was the manifestation of this prophecy. It is also noteworthy that the purification of the Levites was the climax of Malachi's oracle, and likewise, And He Shall Purify is the climax of the second scene, in part the first. And He Shall Purify is written in the key of G minor for 4 voices, a string ensemble, a continuo instrument, in this case a harpsichord, and a bassoon, which doubled the basso continuo part as indicated by the term con fagotto. If you look above the first measure, you'll see the term senza rip. It was typical during the Baroque period for there to be 2 ensemble groups. First was the concertino, which consisted mainly of the first desks, and the ripieno, which was a larger ensemble that would accompany the concertino. So senza means without in Italian, so thus the term senza rip indicates that the beginning of this movement was to be played without the ripieno. In measure 15, however, con rip is used and indicates that at this point in the movement, the ripieno was to join the concertino. It is very interesting throughout this movement to see how the voices work both independently from each other and together at times. It is important to note that there is one main melody with 2 distinct parts. A second melody is introduced at a later time, but we're going to focus on this. So the first part of this main melody consists of a slower quarter and eighth note rhythm and sounds like this. The second part consists of a faster 8th and 16th note rhythm and sounds like this. The soprano begins the movement with a solo with instrumental accompaniment in measures 1 to 5. At measure 5, the bass picks up with that same melody and has a solo through beat 2 of measure 9. At this point, the alto enters with the first phrase of the main melody, but the tenor continues with a faster 8th and 16th note rhythm where it would be, according to pattern so far, expected for the alto voice to continue. The alto, though, does finish the melody it had introduced in the pickups to measure 13. In measure 15, a more complicated shifting between voices occurs and new patterns are introduced. The soprano enters with the second phrase of the main melody, followed by the bass in measure 16 and the tenor in measure 18. In measure 20, all voices have identical rhythm and text in beats 3 and 4 and outline a G major chord. A new melody culminates in measure 21, or letter B, and all voices have almost identical rhythm and text, but they do move in different motions. The soprano holds the melody, with the tenor acting as an accompaniment, moving in parallel thirds. In measures 21 and 22, the bass tends to move in contrary motion when the soprano and tenor move, and oblique motion when they repeat a pitch. The main melody resumes in the soprano at measure 25 with an echo between the soprano and the other three voices. A key change occurs in measure 28, and the key changes from G minor to F major. The key changes again at measure 31, this time from F major to B flat major. The B flat major section ends with all voices singing in unison in text and rhythm in measures 34 and 35. In measure 36, the G minor returns, and measures 38 to 51, all voices alternate sharing the main melody, placing their own variations on the melody. The second theme returns in measure 52, and all parts again share almost identical rhythm and text. The voices conclude in measure 56 and sustained for 2 beats a G minor chord that omits the fifth. Throughout this movement, the instrumentation of the string ensemble alternates between a role of accompaniment and that of precise doubling of certain voices. The harpsichord and bassoon play throughout the entire movement, while the strings act as an accompaniment for the first 14 measures. At measure 15, when the melody becomes complicated, the first violin steps in to double the soprano, and the second violin doubles the tenor an octave higher in measure 18. The entire string section rhythmically doubles the alto, tenor, and bass in measures 26 and 27. And beginning in measure 33, the strings again fall back as an accompaniment to the voices. This accompaniment continues in the first and second violins, while the viola doubles a tenor voice at measure 42. The first violin again steps in to double the soprano at measure 44, and the second violin to briefly double the alto. The instruments are then responsible for concluding the movement and have 2.5 measures of solo after the vocal conclusion. The movement ends with a complete G minor chord. As we have taken a closer look into the text, vocal analysis, and instrumentation of the course number 7, it can be said that though "And He Shall Purify" is relatively short in comparison to the entire Messiah, I think it amply represents the grandiose and spectacular characteristics of the entire composition. The coordination between voices, working both independently and in tandem at times, is absolutely incredible. One of the most striking facts I learned about the Messiah as I was studying was how little time it took Handel to compose the entire thing, just 24 days. Such a masterpiece written out in such a short amount of time is truly and utterly remarkable. And being a Christian myself, such a feat reminds me of God's amazing power and how He created man to create beauty for His glory. So there's a little bit about my movement. I hope you enjoyed listening, and thanks so much.